Alrighty, think we got this working. So, welcome back to Animal Farm, read by Mr. Reese. A little bit later than I intended. My apologies, but we're all still working through this digital learning stuff. Alright, so we're reading chapter 7. Let's get into it. It was a bitter winter. The stormy weather was followed by sleet and snow, and then by a hard frost which did not break till well into February. The animals carried on as best they could with the rebuilding of the windmill, well knowing that the outside world was watching them and that the envious human beings would rejoice and triumph if the mill was not finished on time. Out of spite, the human beings pretended to not believe that it was Snowball who had destroyed the windmill. They said that it had fallen down because the walls were too thin. The animals knew this was not the case. Still, it had been decided to build the walls 3 feet thick this time instead of 18 inches as before, which meant collecting much larger quantities of stone. For a long time the quarry was full of snowdrifts and nothing could be done. Some progress was made in the dry, frosty weather that followed, but it was cruel work, and the animals could not feel so hopeful about it as they had felt before. They were always cold and usually hungry as well. Only Boxer and Clover never lost heart. Squealer made excellent speeches on the joy of service and the dignity of labor, but the other animals found more inspiration in Boxer's strength and his never-failing cry of, "I will work harder." In January, food fell short. The corn ration was drastically reduced, and it was announced that an extra potato ration be issued to make up for it. But then it was discovered that the greater part of the potato crop had been frosted in the clamps, which had been not covered thickly enough. The potatoes had become soft and discolored, and only a few were edible, so for days at a time the animals had nothing to eat but chaff and mangles. Starvation seemed to stare them in the face. It was vitally necessary to conceal this fact from the outside world. Emboldened by the collapse of the windmill, the human beings were inventing fresh lies about Animal Farm, and once again it was being put about that all the animals were dying of famine and disease, that they were continually fighting among themselves, and had resorted to cannibalism and infanticide. Napoleon was well aware of the bad results that might follow if the real facts of the food situation were known, and he decided to make use of Mr. Whymper to spread a contrary impression. Hitherto, the animals had literally no contact with Whymper on his weekly visits. However, a selected few animals, mostly sheep, ordered the were instructed to remark casually in his hearing that rations had been increased. In addition, Napoleon ordered the almost empty bins in the store shed to be filled nearly to the brim with sand, which was then covered up by what remained of the grain and meal. On some suitable pretext, Whymper was led through the store shed and allowed to catch a glimpse of the bins. He was deceived and continued to report to the outside world that there was no food shortage on Animal Farm. Nevertheless, towards the end of January, it became obvious that it would be necessary to procure some more grain from somewhere. In these days, Napoleon rarely appeared in public, but spent all his time in the farmhouse, which was guarded at each door by fierce-looking dogs. When he did emerge, it was in a ceremonial manner, with an escort of 6 dogs who closely surrounded him and growled if anyone came too near. Frequently, he didn't even appear on Sunday mornings, but issued his orders through one of the pigs, usually Squealer. On Sunday morning, Squealer announced that the hens who had just come in to lay again must surrender their eggs. Napoleon had accepted through Whymper a contract for 400 eggs a week. The price of these would pay for enough grain and meal to keep the farm going till summer came on and conditions were easier. Now when the hens heard this, they raised a terrible outcry. They had been warned earlier that this sacrifice might be necessary, but had not believed it would really happen. They were just getting their clutches ready for the spring sitting, and they protested that to take the eggs away now was murder. For the first time since the expulsion of Jones, there was something resembling a rebellion. Led by 3 young black Minorca pullets, the hens made a determined effort to thwart Napoleon's wishes. Their method was to fly up to the rafters and there lay their eggs, which smashed to pieces on the floor. Napoleon acted swiftly and ruthlessly. He ordered the hens' rations to be stopped, and decreed that any animal giving so much as a grain of corn to a hen should be punished by death. And the dogs saw to it that these orders were carried out. So for 5 days the hens held out. When they capitulated and went back to their nesting boxes, 9 hens had died in the meantime. Their bodies were buried in the orchard, and it was given out that they had died of cordyceosis. Whymper had heard nothing of this affair, and the eggs were duly delivered, a grocer's van driving up to the farm once a week to take them away. Now, all this while, no more had been seen of Snowball. He was rumored to be hiding out in one of the neighboring farms, either Foxwood or Pinchfield. Napoleon was by this time on slightly better terms with the other farmers than before. It had happened that in the yard there was a pile of timber which had been stacked there 10 years earlier when a beech spinney was cleared. It was well seasoned, and Whymper had advised Napoleon to sell it. Both Mr. Pillington and Mr. Frederick were anxious to buy it. Napoleon was hesitating between the two, unable to make up his mind. It was noticed that whenever he seemed to be on the point of coming to an agreement with Frederick, Snowball was declared to be hiding at Foxwood. While he inclined towards Pillington, Snowball was said to be at Pinchfield. Suddenly, in early the spring, an alarming thing was discovered. Snowball had been secretly frequenting the farm by night. The animals were so disturbed by this they could hardly sleep in their stalls. Every night it was said that he came creeping under the cover of darkness and performed all kinds of mischief. He stole corn, he upset the milk pails, he broke the eggs, he trampled the seed beds, he gnawed on the bark of the fruit trees. Whenever anything went wrong, it became usual to attribute it to Snowball. If a window was broken or a drain was blocked up, someone was certain to say that Snowball had come in the night and had done it when the key of the store shed was lost, the whole farm was convinced that Snowball had thrown it down the well. Curiously enough, the animals went on believing this even after the mislaid key was found under the stack of meal. The cows declared unanimously that Snowball crept into their stalls and milked them in their sleep. The rats, which had been troublesome in the winter, were also said to be in league with Snowball. Napoleon decreed that there should be a full investigation into Snowball's activities. With his dogs in attendance, he set out and made a careful tour of inspection of the farm buildings, the other animals following at a respectful distance. At every few steps, Napoleon stopped and snuffed the ground for traces of Snowball's footsteps, which he said he could detect by the smell. He snuffed in every corner, in the barn, in the cowshed, in the hen house, in the vegetable garden. He found traces of Snowball almost everywhere. He would put his snout to the ground, give several deep sniffs, and exclaim in a terrible voice, "Snowball! He's been here, I can smell him distinctly." And at the word Snowball, all the dogs let out blood-curdling growls and showed their snide teeth. The animals were thoroughly frightened. It seemed to them that Snowball were some kind of invisible influence pervading the air about them, menacing them with all kinds of dangers. In the evening, Squealer called them together with an alarmed expression on his face, and he told them that he had some serious news to report. "Comrades," cried Squealer, making little nervous skips, "a most terrible thing has been discovered. Snowball has sold himself to Frederick of Pinchfield Farm, who is even now plotting to attack us and take our farm away from us. Snowball is to act as his guide when the attack begins. But it is worse than that. We thought that Snowball's rebellion was caused simply by his vanity and ambition. But we were wrong, comrades. Do you see what the real reason was? Snowball was in league with Jones from the very start. He was Jones's secret agent all the time. He has been proved by documents which he left behind, which we've only just now discovered, and to my mind this explains a great deal, comrades. Do we not see for ourselves how he attempted, fortunately without success, to get us defeated and destroyed at the Battle of the Cowshed?" The animals were stupefied. This was a wickedness far outdoing Snowball's destruction of the windmill, but it was some minutes before they could fully take it in. They all remembered, or at least they thought they remembered, how they had seen Snowball charging ahead of them at the Battle of the Cowshed, how he had rallied and encouraged them at every turn, and how he had not paused for an instant when the pellets of Jones's gun had wounded his back. At first it was a little difficult to see how this fitted in with him being on Jones's side. Even Boxer, who seldom asked questions, was puzzled. He laid down, tucked his forehoofs between him, shut his eyes, and with a hard effort managed to formulate his thoughts. "I do not believe that," he said. "Snowball fought bravely at the Battle of Cowshed. I saw him myself. Did we not give him Animal Hero First Class immediately afterwards? That was our mistake, comrade. For now it is written down in the secret documents that we had found that in reality he was trying to lure us to our doom." But he was wounded," said Boxer. "We all saw him running with blood." "That was part of the arrangement," cried Squealer. "Jones has shoddily grazed him. I could show you this in his own writing, if you were able to read it. The plot for Snowball, it was at the critical moment to give the signal for flight, and leave the field to the enemy. And he very nearly succeeded. I'll even say, comrades, he would have succeeded if it had not been for our heroic leader, Comrade Napoleon. Do you not remember how just at the moment when Jones and his men got inside the yard, Snowball suddenly turned and fled, and many animals followed him? And do you not remember, too, how it was just at that moment, when panic was spreading and all seemed lost, that Comrade Napoleon sprang forward and with a cry of "Death to humanity!" sank his teeth into Jones's leg? Surely you remember that, comrades, exclaimed Squealer, frisking from side to side. Now, when Squealer described that scene so graphically, it seemed to all the animals that they did remember it. At any rate, they remembered that at the critical moment of the battle, Snowball had turned to flee. But Boxer was still a little uneasy. "I do not believe that Snowball was a traitor from the beginning," he said firmly. "Now what he has done since is different. But I believe that at the Battle of the Cowshed, he was a good comrade." "Our leader, Comrade Napoleon," announced Squealer, speaking very slowly and firmly, "has stated categorically, comrade, that Snowball was Jones's agent from the very beginning. Yes, and from long before the rebellion was even thought of." "Oh, well, that is different," said Boxer. "If Comrade Napoleon says it, then it must be right." "Now, that is the true spirit, comrade," cried Squealer. But it was noticed that he cast a very ugly look at Boxer with his little twinkling eyes. He turned to go, then paused and added impressively, "Now I warn every animal on this farm to keep his eyes very wide open. For we have reason to think that some of Snowball's secret agents are lurking among us at this very moment." 4 days later, in the late afternoon, Napoleon ordered all the animals to assemble in the yard. When they were all gathered together, Napoleon emerged from the farmhouse wearing both of his medals, for he had recently awarded himself Animal Hero First Class and Animal Hero Second Class. With his 9 huge dogs frisking around him, uttering growls that sent shivers down all the animals' spines, they cowered silently in their places, seeming to know in advance that some terrible thing was about to happen. Napoleon sternly stood, surveying his audience, and then he uttered a high-pitched whimper. And immediately the dogs bounded forward, seized 4 of the pigs by the ear, and dragged them, squealing with pain and terror, to Napoleon's feet. The pigs' ears were bleeding, the dogs had tasted blood, and for a few moments they appeared to go quite mad. To the amazement of everybody, 3 of them flung themselves upon Boxer. Boxer saw them coming and put out his great hoof and caught a dog mid-air, pinned him to the ground, and the dog shrieked for mercy, while the other 2 fled with their tails between their legs. Boxer looked at Napoleon to know whether he should crush the dog to death or let it go. Napoleon appeared to change countenance, and sharply ordered Boxer to let the dog go. Boxer lifted his hoof, and the dog slunk away, bruised and howling. Presently the tumult died down. The 4 pigs waited, trembling, with guilt written on every line of their countenances. Napoleon now called upon them to confess their crimes. They were the same 4 pigs that had protested when Napoleon had abolished the Sunday meetings. Without any further prompting, they confessed that they had been secretly in touch with Snowball ever since his expulsion. They had collaborated with him in destroying the windmill, and they had entered an agreement with him to hand over Animal Farm to Mr. Frederick. They added that Snowball had privately admitted to them that he had been Jones's secret agent from years past. When they had finished their confession, the dogs promptly tore their throats out, and in a terrible voice, Napoleon demanded whether any other animal had anything to confess. The 3 hens who had been the ringleaders in the attempted rebellion over the eggs now came forward and stated that Snowball had appeared to them in a dream and incited them to disobey Napoleon's orders. They, too, were slaughtered. Then a goose came forward and confessed to having secreted 6 ears of corn during the last year's harvest and eaten them in the night. Then a sheep confessed to having urinated in the drinking pool, urged to do this, so she said, by Snowball. The 2 other sheep confessed to having murdered an old ram, an especially devoted follower of Napoleon, by chasing him around and round a bonfire when he was suffering from a cough. And so, every single one of them was slain on the spot. And so the tale of confessions and executions went on until there were a pile of corpses laying before Napoleon's feet, and the air was heavy with the smell of blood, which had been unknown there since the expulsion of Jones. When it was all over, the remaining animals, except for the pigs and dogs, crept away in a body. They were shaken and miserable. They didn't know what was worse: the shocking treachery of the animals who had leagued themselves with Snowball, or the cruel retribution that they had just witnessed. In the old days, there had been often scenes of bloodshed equally terrible, but it seemed to them that this was far worse now that it was happening amongst themselves. Since Jones had left the farm until today, no animal had killed another animal, not even a rat had been killed. They made their way onto the little knoll where the half-finished windmills stood, and with one accord they all laid down, as though huddling together for warmth. Clover, Muriel, Benjamin, the cows, the sheep, a whole flock of geese, the hens, everyone indeed except the cat, who had suddenly disappeared just before Napoleon ordered the animals to assemble. For some time nobody spoke. Only Boxer remained on his feet, fidgeting to and fro, swishing his long black tail against his sides, and occasionally uttering a little whinny of surprise. And finally he said, I do not understand it. I would not have believed such things could happen on our farm. It must be due to some fault in ourselves. The solution, as I see it, is to work harder. From now onwards, I shall get up a full hour earlier in the mornings. As he moved off at his lumbering trot and made for the quarry, having got there, he collected 2 successive loads of stone and dragged them down to the windmill before retiring for the night. The animals huddled about Clover, not speaking. The knoll where they were laying gave them a wide prospect across the countryside. Most of Animal Farm was within their view, the long pastures stretching down to the main road, the hayfield, the spinney, the drinking pool, the plowed fields where the young wheat was thick and green, and the red roofs of the farm buildings with smoke curling from the chimneys. It was a clear spring evening. The grass and the bursting hedges were gilded by the level rays of the sun. Never had the farm, and with a kind of surprise they remembered it was their own farm, every inch of it their own property, never had the farm appeared to the animals so desirable a place. And as Clover looked down the hillside, her eyes filled with tears. If she could have spoken her thoughts, it would have been to say that this was not what they had aimed at when they set themselves years ago to work for the overthrow of the human race. These scenes of terror and slaughter were not what they had looked forward to on that night when old Major first stirred them to rebellion. If she herself had any picture of the future, it had been a society of animals set free from hunger and the whip, all equal, each working according to his capacity, the strong protecting the weak, as she had protected that lost brood of ducklings with her foreleg on the night of Major's speech. Instead, she did not know why they had come to a time when no one dared speak his mind, when fierce, growling dogs roamed everywhere, and you had to watch your comrades torn to pieces after confessing to shocking crimes. There was no thought of rebellion or disobedience in her mind. She knew that even as things were, that they were far better off than they had been in the days of Jones, and that, before all else, it was needful to prevent the return of human beings. Whatever happened, she would remain faithful, work hard, and carry out the orders that were given to her, to accept the leadership of Napoleon. But still, it was not for this that she and all the other animals had hoped and toiled. It was not for this that they had built the windmill and faced the bullets of Jones's gun. Such were her thoughts, though she lacked the words to express them. At last, feeling this to be in some way a substitute for the word she was unable to find, she began to sing Beasts of England. The other animals sitting round her took it up, as they sang it 3 times over, very tunefully but slowly and mournfully, in a way that they had never sung it before. They had just finished singing it for the 3rd time when Squealer, attended by 2 dogs, approached them with the air of having something important to say. He announced that, by a special decree of Comrade Napoleon, Beasts of England had been abolished. From now on, it was forbidden to sing it. The animals were taken aback. "Why?" cried Muriel. "It is no longer needed, comrade," said Squealer stiffly. Beasts of England was the song of the rebellion, but the rebellion is now completed. The execution of the traitors this afternoon was the final act. The enemy, both external and internal, has been defeated. In Beasts of England, we express the longing for a better society in days to come, but now that society has been established. Clearly, the song has no purpose. Frightened as though they were, some of the animals might possibly have protested, but at this moment the sheep set up their usual bleating of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, which went on for several minutes and put an end to the discussion. So Beasts of England was heard no more. In its place, Minimus, the poet, had composed another song, which began, Animal farm, never through me shall thou come to harm. And this was sung every Sunday morning after the hoisting of the flag, but somehow neither the words nor the tune seemed to the animals to come up to Beasts of England. So, in this chapter, things get a little intense. I want you to think about comparing this chapter to what you read in the Stalin Common Lit. What event in Russian history does this sort of seem similar to, and what is the connection between Russian history and this book? George Orwell wrote Animal Farm for a specific purpose, and while we can point to North Korea today as a similar parallel to Animal Farm, this book was written before North Korea was even a country. What was George Orwell's purpose in writing this? Now, some questions specifically related to the chapter. Why do you think Squealer and Napoleon decided to abolish Beasts of England? What's the point of that? Did the animals who were executed really commit those crimes? Or, well, maybe they were executed for another purpose. In addition, what is ultimately the reason why the animals have trouble actually rebelling? Clover, it says that she couldn't put her thoughts into words. What do the animals need in order to properly rebel? And then, the last question I want to ask is, well, in this chapter, the executions are bloody and quite violent. What is now the tone of Animal Farm compared to how it was in the beginning? How is this now shifted? George Orwell initially called this a fairy story, or basically a fairy tale. Is this in line with a fairy tale? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the chapter. Stay tuned for Chapter 8.